proud dad. He's like kind of, command central in his Houston office.
Much of his life has been spent in the shadows of politics, as confidant and aide to a well-known father. This race was his own, and as election night slowly ground toward a crescendo of numbers, George W. Bush sat relaxed and smiling, watching returns with his wife and friends in a hotel suite. Aides checked the numbers on a computer down the hall. They were adding up in his favor, and he knew within an hour and a half of the polls closing, he would be the governor-elect.
I'm going to be a very engaged governor. It may be said after 4 years of George W. Bush that, man, he led, he fought, he expended political capital, he was bruised and battered, but he fought for what he thought was right. I think you'll find, I do not subscribe to the theory that the governorship of Texas is a weak office. I think the governorship of Texas can be a weak office if the occupant does not want to fight and lead. And this is 4 years of doing what I think is right for Texas.
A journey that began in a Dallas hotel 1 year ago to the day ended in a packed ballroom in Austin with cheering supporters who see a fundamental change sweeping Texas. Some call it evidence that this is truly a two-party state. And from the new governor-elect, a message for those who did not vote for him.
I will be your governor because my mission is to include, not exclude, to unify, not to divide. You see, this is how we will achieve our dream in Texas, that our Texas become a beacon state, a state so different and so unusual that people will look at us and say, that's where I want to realize my entrepreneurial dream. That's where I want to raise my family.
Bush says he understands the seriousness of what lies ahead, and he pledges to work hard to implement what he talked about during the campaign. But he will need cooperation and understanding of Democrats, who have been dealt a heavy blow. One of the victors in this election is also irony. George W. Bush pulled a Bill Clinton on Ann Richards. He said that she was the symbol of status quo and he was the agent of change. And indeed, that's what's happened. He is now the governor-elect. Doug Fox, Channel 8 News, Austin.
One prominent Democrat said Ann Richards was a jewel in their crown, but the kingdom has collapsed. In defeat, the old governor reached out to the new.
All of us wish him the very best in taking office in January because he is taking on the responsibility for Texas. And that means that he deserves Godspeed.
Those close to Richards say the loss is easier for her to accept because her popularity level stayed near 60%, leading her to conclude that she's a victim of timing.
We worked hard. We ran a good race. We have done a lot of good for Texas. This is not the end of the world. It is the end of a campaign.
Richards said from the outset this would be a tight race. In some ways, history foreshadowed this loss. Texans never have elected a governor to 2 consecutive 4-year terms. And then there's 1992, when Bill Clinton managed to win the presidency without carrying Texas. The only time a Democrat has been able to do that since the state entered the Union. Richards said she will not run for office again. She's been a Travis County commissioner, the state treasurer, the governor, and she left the stage with a simple thanks.
God bless you, and thank you all very much.
Allenberg, Channel 8 News, Austin.
My legislative agenda is a conservative agenda. It's also very realistic, and it's one that I think most Texans will understand will make Texas a better place. I believe that by winning 54% of the vote, it helps a lot to get a legislative agenda across. I understand full well that it is not a Republican agenda, because there's going to be a lot of Democrats who will support my plans to make our schools better, our streets safer, and the welfare system more responsible. I believe I'm going to have a program that's simple and clear to understand that will work. I don't mind expending the political capital necessary to make it work. And so 6 months from now, if I stand here bloodied and bruised, it's not because I didn't try to do what the voters of Texas sent me to Austin to do.
Well, of course, we're very proud of our sons, very pleased with the results in the state of Texas. Our son, George W., now the new governor, Disappointed, of course, that Jeb didn't quite make it in Florida, but he fought the good fight.
Well, we did great. Thank you. Thank you, buddy. Thanks for working for me.
This is Daniel Rojo.
Hi, Daniel. Good to meet
Been out
you.
walking the blocks for you.
Thank you so much.
Bill and I are so proud of you. We just can't tell you how.
The First Lady.
I'm
Thanks
so
for all your help.
I
It's a great victory.
Very proud. And I have a real special feeling for that house. And I'm so glad
Would you talk to Laura about that?
Yes,
I wish you would.
Yeah,
Harriet Myers, who is who was my chief counsel and a fine person, spoke about ethics. I made it very clear to anybody around me this morning and anybody who chooses to serve in my administration that I'll stand for only one standard of ethical behavior, and that's the absolute best ethical behavior. And so we start.
No candidate gets elected without a lot of help. Bush says he assembled the best campaign staff he could find, charted a course of action, and stayed on target. He's now thanking those who helped him to victory by visiting his campaign offices in Austin and Dallas, and tomorrow in Houston. Earlier today in Austin, he told a packed post-election news conference that he views his victory as a clear mandate for change. He also feels his issue-focused campaign obviously worked well.
I think the lesson I learned is message does matter. It matters what you believe in your heart of hearts. Political philosophy is essential, as well as making sure that Texans understand that there is a bright future. And so I stand here as a humbled soul, obviously pleased with the verdict of our state, and anxious to begin the transition process of being the governor.
Bush says he will meet soon with Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock and House Speaker Pete Laney to discuss his legislative agenda of reforms in education, welfare, juvenile justice, and personal injury litigation. And he says Governor Ann Richards offers complete cooperation during the transition.
I can't tell you how cooperative the governor's staff is being. They've an unbelievably pleasant experience. My conversation with Governor Richards last night, likewise, was pleasant, respectful, and I was very grateful for the way she conducted our conversation.
Governor Richards did not hold any post-election news conference or make any public appearances, but she told her supporters last night it's time to turn the other cheek.
All of us wish him the very best in taking office in January, because he is taking on the responsibility for Texas. And that means that he deserves Godspeed. That means he deserves our help.
Campaign signs are just one way that you can tell a transition in power is underway. The Bush staff met with the Richards staff down in Austin this afternoon to begin the transition process. And one other symbol, one of the Department of Public Safety's Texas Rangers, who guards the governor and has guarded her for the past 4 years, today was at the side of George W. Bush here in Dallas. He begins his life in the public fishbowl in earnest. Doug Fox, Channel 8 News.
George W. Bush advocates violating the settlement of the 20-year-old Ruiz overcrowding lawsuit to regain full control of Texas prisons. But a key negotiator of the settlement says a violation could lead to more federal control.
I think the state of Texas ought to appeal it, fight it, violate it.
Bush sent a shockwave through the prison system in a campaign speech to the Texas Police Chiefs Association last spring. He wanted to put 34,000 inmates in tents to relieve county jail overcrowding and to set off a higher court challenge of Ruiz.
It is very, very foolish to begin that process with a willful violation of an existing order.
Steve Martin was the primary negotiator of the Ruiz settlement for the Texas Attorney General. Martin says Texas should try to terminate the Ruiz requirements in court rather than violate the agreement.
The best way to do it is go to the court with clean hands and say we're operating constitutionally. This is our plan to maybe run a leaner and meaner operation.
The state could then appeal the settlement without risking a new federal takeover of its prisons. That settlement narrowly restricts use of tents to temporary work or boot camps. Guards say they prefer steel, not canvas, between them and violent criminals. Inmates burned tent cities in the early 80s.
Once the disturbance started, they lost control immediately of that tent area.
But on the campaign trail, housing inmates in Spartan tents struck a popular chord.
Because if tents are good enough for the military people, they are good enough for the criminals in the state of Texas.
George W. Bush faces two major obstacles on the Ruiz case. A prison board that 2 years ago wanted to lock the state into tighter federal controls. And federal Judge William Wayne Justice, who shows no sign of relinquishing his power over the prison system. Robert Riggs, Channel 8 News.
The only thing I think they knew to do yesterday was to try to make a change in the people who were in control and who had been. And I regret that some of the people who lost are people who made this a lot better country.
"15 months ago, George W. Bush sat down with a political consultant and said, if I focus on the issues, run a positive campaign, and treat Ann Richards with respect, I will win. He did, thunderously, and he knows why.
I believe I won this race because I was able to articulate philosophical differences between the governor and me and clearly told Texas where I wanted to lead on issues that matter to Texans.
Bush's record, $371 million in business losses.
The Bush win also is a victory over negative advertising. Attack ads about Bush's business background were the heart of the Ann Richards TV campaign, and apparently it turned people off.
If you believe the exit polling, by almost a 2.5 to 1 margin, Texans think we ran a more positive campaign than she did, and obviously that, I think, had an impact.
Thank you for running.
Bush visited campaign offices in Austin and Dallas to say thanks to those who helped bring him victory. He told supporters he will push his priorities with the legislature, reforms in juvenile justice, education, welfare, and personal injury litigation. He also said he offered voters something Ann Richards didn't, something his father used to call the vision thing.
An incumbent has got just as much it's just as necessary for an incumbent as it is for a challenger to talk about the future. And instead of talking about the future, she talked about me. And I found that to be a political opening that I was able to exploit.
Governor Richards, meanwhile, stayed out of the public spotlight during the day, meeting privately with her staff and telling them sometimes it is not the good works by which you are judged. But Bush says Richards and her staff have been most helpful in making sure there is a smooth transition of power and personal comforts.
Ann Richards was very graceful in her concession, and she told me on the phone that she would be more than happy to help Laura with the governor's mansion and to help in the transition, and I will take her for her word. I do think it's appropriate, though, that both of us get a good rest.
And one symbol the transition is underway, a member of the governor's security detail who has guarded Ann Richards for 4 years, can now be seen watching over George W. Bush, governor-elect. Doug Fox, Channel 8 News.
I love the pageantry of the inauguration. I love the certain things that don't change, the parade, the swearing in, the Ross volunteers, those aspects that a lot of other governors have gone through in the past, because I think it reinforces some of the finest parts of democracy, the peaceful transfer of power, which is so important to the stability of our state and our country.
4 years ago, Ann Richards stood out there on the south steps of the Capitol and she talked about a new Texas and reopening state government to the people. Now, some might argue that she succeeded in that and the people elected you. What can we expect in your inaugural address, and more importantly, what do you hope to accomplish in that address?
I want to set a tone. I don't want to necessarily get too issue specific, but I want to talk about freedom from the federal government and faith that local people can make the right decisions, that Texans can run Texas, but also that as we seek freedom and are granted freedom, that each and every one of us must be responsible and held accountable for our behavior. I want Texas to be the responsible state. I know this, Doug, that unless and until our cultural shifts that says to each and every person that you are accountable for what you do, our children will not have as peaceful and prosperous future as they should. And I want our state of Texas to be a party to not the sole agent of, but a party to a cultural shift that 30 years from now we can look back and say, thank goodness that happened.
The man who used to sleep in the house where you're going to spend your first night as governor had a saying that goes, do right and risk the consequences. Are you prepared to make enemies out of your friends and supporters when they approach you with some request for special treatment or some favor?
Sure.
And do right and risk the consequences?
We've already started doing that. It's an amazing thing. He's right. The good news about doing right and risking the consequences, in my case, the consequences aren't all that bad, which would be go back to the baseball world. But he is absolutely correct. It's the only way to be an effective governor. And one of the things I've learned early, Doug, in this business is that by picking someone for a board and commission or choosing so-and-so to be the insurance commissioner, the reaction to such an appointment, generally, the one at least you hear, is not overall praise. Oftentimes you hear, why didn't you pick so-and-so? Why didn't you pick me? You should have picked him, or you should have picked her. And so this job ultimately will be one of making correct and tough decisions and not worrying about consequences.
It was a show of unity in a party that's getting big enough to have splits and splinter groups. State Republican Chairman Tom Pauken never surfaced much during the Bush campaign.
And for you today, the governor-elect of this great state, George Bush.
But the governor-elect showed up with the only other Republican governor in more than 100 years to raise $175,000 for the party. And Bush assured his fellow Republicans he's hot to trot.
I am fully prepared to be your governor, and I can't wait to do so. It is a huge honor. It is a huge honor, and I know it is.
Texas inaugural.
The Bush Inaugural Committee has been working feverishly since the November election, preparing for the ceremony that takes place Tuesday on the steps of the state capitol.
Texans can run Texas.
Bush already is looking beyond the inauguration and what he hopes to accomplish in his first 100 days in office.
You can expect tort reform. I believe we'll get it in the first 100 days. You can expect, and I'm not so sure this will happen in the first 100 days, but I can assure you that the stamp of decontrol of our school system will become very apparent in the first 100 days. As the decontrol debate rages, home rule education districts will be part of that debate.
Tort reform legislation already is in the works, and soon bills to reform welfare and the juvenile justice system will follow. While the governor-elect prepares for his inauguration, groundskeepers prepare the mansion for his arrival. Bush will be the 46th governor to sleep in the historic old home. Ann Richards moved out some weeks ago, so a little refurbishing can take place. And the governor-elect admits relocating a family with twin teenage daughters is one of his big concerns.
I suspect dealing with teenage daughters is going to be a lot more difficult than dealing with the legislature.
On his way into the Frank Erwin Center, George W. Bush said, "I feel good," and indeed he should, because he celebrates the success of a year of slogging his way across the state of Texas, listening to people and their concerns about state government and what he wants to do about it. Enough, apparently like what he said, that he is now going to be inaugurated as governor of Texas. Doug Fox, Channel 8 News, Austin.
Shall we pray?
In his invocation, Reverend Billy Graham said much is expected from those to whom much is given. George W. Bush took the stage with his family and parents. He stood before a crowd that included political powers past and present, and he laid out a vision wrapped around the words personal responsibility.
I also recognize freedom without responsibility is simply license. For the last 30 years, our culture has steadily replaced personal responsibility with collective guilt. This must end.
To Governor Bush, that means juvenile crime laws need to be strengthened, local school districts given more power, our legal system reformed.
Texas must end the junk lawsuits that clog our courts and threaten our producers. Doing so will expand our job base so that anyone in Texas who wants a job can find one.
The governor spoke for 11 minutes, weaving a tapestry of words and images. A boy listened from a tree, another captured the speech on tape, and several thousand people gathered to watch change as it occurred.
It is within the power of every Texan working together to mold a bright future. I ask for your help, your commitment, and your prayers for the work ahead.
One of the most encouraging signs of the day was a similarity in the speeches of the governor and lieutenant governor. Mr. Bullock said he viewed the Bush agenda as a continuation of his own.
In the last 4 years, we've created the framework for a strategic plan for our future. And the time is now at hand for all Texans to join with your leaders in implementing that plan with faith and confidence in our future and ourselves.
It is a day far removed from the cynicism and anger that drove November's elections. The talk now is of common goals and a shared future, and how a new governor can best lead a state. Alan Berg, Channel 8 News, Austin.
I bet you there's a good chance that maybe the next governor of Texas, or a next governor of Texas, is sitting out here. I want you to know that you can dream the big dream. There are people that love you, people that care for you, and there's a God that blesses you. Thank you for sharing this day with us. It has made a wonderful day even more special. God bless you, and God bless Texas.
For one day, all the cynicism about politics and skepticism about government is set aside. In the shadow of the Capitol, cannon, an honor guard, and a military flyover signaled the coming of change.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
Governor George W. Bush stood on a platform surrounded by political powers past and present. His father said this is among his proudest moments, eclipsing his own inauguration as president. His son's vision is of a government where more is less.
If we trust Texans to make the best decision for Texas, and we do, we must also trust Texans to make the best decisions for their local communities and local schools. My guiding principle will be government if necessary, but not necessarily government.
Governor Bush said he'll push to limit lawsuits, curb juvenile crime, and deregulate education. These stances helped him win election by one of the largest margins in recent history. Just as significant, Lieutenant Governor Bob Bullock views the Bush agenda as a continuation of his own.
We're cutting costs and holding government accountable, and will not stop. We balanced the budget without new taxes, and we will do so again.
A crowd estimated at 5,000 watched change as it took place. The images of transition were captured by camera and tape recorder and an artist. For some, George W. Bush rekindled the flame.
First one I felt like coming to, and I'm real proud of it.
I just felt a little bit of an obligation to come to this one.
My enthusiasm for our mission is exceeded only by my confidence that we can succeed. And when we do, those who feel left behind will have new hope. Those who have grown cynical will begin to care. And our children will grow up in a more prosperous and peaceful Texas.
With this ceremony, George W. Bush now leads a government he so often has criticized. The state's hopes lie in his hands. It is his turn to lead. Alan Berg, Channel 8 News, Austin.
Some 30 high school and college bands took part in the 73-unit parade that marched up Congress Avenue to the state capitol.
The W.T. White High School Marching Band.
From Dallas, there was the W.T. White Marching Longhorns Band. Playing the same marching music as the Arlington Heights High School Band from Fort Worth. It was hard to say who was best. And there was the Terrell School District's high school marching band and drill team. They marched to a different drummer. Governor Bush piled out of his convertible and joined his father in the reviewing stand until the last unit rolled by. After the parade, the Bush family was off to the races, the Armadillo races, staged by some of the 900 Texas youngsters who turned out for an event called A Salute to Texas Children, held at Austin's Paramount Theater. The needs of children have been a central theme of the new governor. He spent about an hour with this group, even shaking hands with the winning Armadillo, and then giving the youngsters some encouraging words.
There are people that love you, people that care for you, and there's a God that blesses you. Thank you for sharing this day with us. It has made a wonderful day even more special.